The old leather sign above the workshop door still read, Rust Wolves Moto Club, though most people in town pretended not to notice it anymore. 10 years ago, the wolves had been everywhere, escorting charity rides, rescuing stranded travelers, helping clean up after storms. But time had a way of wearing even the strongest things down. Members drifted away, got married, aged, and the ones who stayed behind carried scars deeper than the ink on their arms. Jax Carter, the club's last remaining founding member, was one of them. Gray streaks in his beard, limbs stiff from old crashes, but a stare sharp enough to cut metal. The wolves weren't a gang, they were a brotherhood. At least they used to be. And Jack still lived by one rule: never let the powerful prey on the powerless. Which was exactly what had been happening in their quiet, dusty town. It started with whispers. Adil and Rohail, two wealthy old men who owned half the land near the interstate, had begun evicting small homeowners. The town had always tolerated their greed, people avoided them, shook their heads, but still bowed their heads in silence. Because Adil and Rohail weren't just wealthy, they were vindictive. They had friends in the police force. They had lawyers who could turn lies into truth. They had money to make witnesses disappear and evidence dissolve. And now they wanted something bigger. The last affordable neighborhood on the east side, a humble block full of aging houses and families living paycheck to paycheck, was standing in the way of their new luxury resort plan. They started small, forged notices, manipulated paperwork, late-night threats, windows shattered mysteriously, mailboxes burned, a dog poisoned, an elderly woman's ramp ripped off her home. Then came the night they targeted Mia. Mia was 22, living in her late father's small house. She worked 2 part-time jobs, saving every rupee she could. The house wasn't much, cracked paint, squeaky porch, but it was hers. Her father had rebuilt the engine of her little Suzuki bike with his own hands. When he died, the wolves were the only ones who came to his funeral. Mia had known them since childhood. She was like everyone's kid sister, and Adil and Rohail wanted her house badly. That night, Mia woke to noises, footsteps outside, murmurs, something metallic scraping against her door. When the lock snapped, she panicked. She grabbed her phone, trembling fingers calling the only number she could think of. Jax. He answered in 3 rings. Mia? You okay? Her voice broke. They're inside. Jax didn't ask who. Didn't waste a second. Didn't tell her to hide. He just said, I'm coming. By the time Jax and 2 other wolves reached her street, Adil and Rohail's hired thugs were already dragging Mia out by her arm. She was kicking and screaming, barefoot, pleading for someone to help her. But the neighbors stayed behind curtains, terrified. Jax didn't hesitate. He kicked his bike stand down, stepped off slowly, like a man walking toward a fight he'd been preparing for years. Behind him, Bear and Zane flanked like shadows, big, silent, and furious. A thug shoved Mia onto the lawn. Old men said, get her out. Burn the house after. Jax's jaw tightened. Touch her again, he said quietly, and you won't be holding anything for the rest of your life. The thug laughed, until Jax moved. It was fast, brutal, efficient. A single punch to the throat dropped the man gasping. Bear grabbed the second by the collar and slammed him against the fence so hard the boards cracked. Zane twisted the last one's arm until something snapped. The hired men scrambled away, whimpering in pain, but the real monsters weren't the thugs. It was the 2 corrupted old men standing by the black SUV at the end of the block. Adil smirked, gold ring gleaming. This isn't your concern, Carter. You're outdated trash on an outdated bike. Rohail added, the girl refused our offer. Now she deals with the consequences. Mia cried out, you forged the documents. This is my home. Adil shrugged. Prove it in court. They laughed. Jax didn't move, but something changed in his stare, something ancient, something cold. You crossed a line tonight. You scared a girl who grew up trusting this town. You ruined families. You burned homes. And you stand here thinking you're untouchable. Bear cracked his knuckles. We gonna let him walk, Jax? But Jax didn't answer. Not yet. Adil and Rohail got back inside their SUV, snickering. Stay in your lane, Carter, Rohail said through the window. You're old. You're crippled. You're nobody. Jax watched them leave, engine rumbling into the night. He didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't chase. He just whispered to himself, they think age makes us weak. Bear looked at him. Brother, what are you thinking? Jax's eyes burned. But it only makes us patient. Something dark and powerful awakened in him. a vow carved in iron. "This isn't over," he said. "Not until those two learn a lesson they'll never forget." And for the first time in years, the wolves howled again. The next morning, Mia sat at the Rust Wolves' workshop with red eyes and trembling hands. She hadn't slept. Her front door was splintered, her living room wrecked, and she was terrified they would come back. Zane made her a cup of tea, but her hands shook too much to hold it. Jax entered, his leather jacket still dusty from the night ride. He placed an envelope in front of her. "I went to your house at sunrise," he said gently. "Everything's still there. I changed the lock. No one's getting inside now." Mia exhaled a shaky breath. "They won't stop, Jax. They want that land more than anything, and they're not getting it," he replied. Bear leaned against the counter, arms crossed like two tree trunks. "We've ignored a deal in Rohale for too long. They think fear can buy them respect. Fear can buy silence," Jax said, "but not respect." Zane smirked. "So what's the plan? Talk to them, or burn their fancy hotel down first?" Mia flinched at the word burn. Jax shook his head. "No, we do this clean, smart, and loud enough that the whole town wakes up. Because teaching someone a lesson wasn't about fists. Not at first. It was about truth. The wolves start digging." For years, people suspected the two old men were involved in illegal deals, but no one ever proved it. A deal in Rohale had buried their tracks carefully and paid the right people to keep the dirt hidden. But they forgot one thing. Bikers know everyone. Truck drivers, waitresses, mechanics, security guards. People talked to the wolves because the wolves listened, so they began collecting stories. A trucker admitted he once hauled mysterious boxes for them in the middle of the night. A clerk confessed she watched a deal fake signatures on land deeds. A fired worker told them that Rohale paid inspectors to overlook structural violations. A teen revealed he'd been threatened by a deal after witnessing something he shouldn't have. Piece by piece, the truth formed a monster, ugly and undeniable. Meanwhile, tensions in town grew. Word spread that the wolves were investigating. Some people cheered. Others feared retaliation. But deep down, everyone knew someone had to stand up to those two old devils. A deal and Rohale strike back. When the old men heard about the wolves digging, they didn't panic. They laughed. That afternoon, their black SUV crawled into the workshop alley again. A deal stepped out with a cane, tapping it arrogantly on the ground. "Carter, we hear you've been snooping around. That's a hobby that can hurt your brothers." Rohale lit a cigar, especially the girl living alone. Shame if her house caught fire while she wasn't around. Jack stepped outside slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. He wasn't smiling. "Threaten her again," he said quietly, "and I'll make sure you never walk straight again." Rohale laughed. "You think the town will defend you? They hate bikers, they love money, and we have all of it." Adil leaned forward, pointing his cane at Jax's chest. "Back off, Carter, or we'll bury you." Jax didn't blink. "You already tried to bury us. Now watch how deep we can dig." The old men left, but not before scratching Bear's bike with the cane, a mocking insult. Bear's eyes darkened like a storm. "Jax, we riding tonight?" "Not yet," Jax said. But inside the fire was growing. The night of the traps. The wolves knew the old men would try something reckless, and they were right. At midnight, 3 masked men appeared outside Mia's home. They carried gas cans. They whispered orders. They looked around nervously. But they didn't know the wolves were already watching. Jax, Bear, Zane, and 3 other riders had planned for this. They hid in the shadows, engines cold, lights off, waiting for the intruders to make their move. One of the masked men stepped onto Mia's porch with a lighter. Jax emerged silently behind him. "Drop it." The man froze. By the time he turned around, Bear had his arms pinned. Zane had taken the lighter, and 2 wolves were tying the others with nylon rope. Mia, watching from her window, gasped. They had caught all 3 without throwing a single punch. Jax crouched in front of the tied men. "Who sent you?" They said nothing. Bear cracked his knuckles behind them. The men panicked. "A deal. It was a deal. He paid us, told us to scare her, not burn anything." "We swear." Zane scoffed. "Scare her? You broke into a woman's house." One attacker whimpered, "Please, we're just workers. He said if we refused, he'd blacklist us. No jobs, no income." Jax understood something then. Adil and Rohale weren't just monsters, They were cowards who used fear to make others do their dirty work. "Go home," Jack said finally, cutting their ropes. "Tell no one what happened. And if they call again, you call us instead." The men scrambled away gratefully. Mia stepped outside, wrapping her arms around herself. "Jax, I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "No one's getting hurt. They're the ones getting exposed. And after that," she whispered. Jax looked at the faint glow of the city lights, fists clenched. "After that, we teach them what fear really feels like. The wolves' real plan begins." The next day brought movement, quiet, strategic, and unstoppable. Zane hacked into public land records to gather documents. Bear contacted every family Adil and Rohail had wronged. 2 wolves rode to the next city to find a journalist known for taking down corrupt officials. Old club members returned one by one, as if a forgotten oath had been reawakened. The wolves had risen again. Meanwhile, Mia sorted old papers in her dad's drawer and found something shocking. Proof that Adil had illegally bought her land's neighboring property by bribing a county officer. She rushed to the workshop. "Jax, this can expose everything." Jax took the document, studying it. "This is enough to start a war. But you said we'd stay clean," she whispered. Jax looked at her with a slow, almost dangerous smile. "We are staying clean. They aren't." He turned to the wolves. "Tonight we ride. And tomorrow morning those 2 old men will wake up in a nightmare." That night, engines thundered, black jackets glistened under streetlights, and a message spread across town like wildfire. "The wolves are back." Morning rose heavy with tension. The town felt like someone had wound a clock too tight, and everyone was waiting for the moment it snapped. Doors stayed shut, cars drove slower, even the birds seemed to stay quiet. And in the middle of it all, the wolves prepared for the day Adil and Rohail would never forget. Jack stood outside the workshop, gazing at the long road leading into town. He had seen many battles in his life, gang fights, road wars, betrayals, loss. But this wasn't a fight for territory or pride. This was a fight for the soul of the town. Bear tightened the straps on his vest. "You think they'll run?" "They'll try," Jack said. "But not before they see everything crumble beneath their feet." Zane revved his bike once, a short growl. "Let's light them up." Mia watched from the doorway, her fingers gripping each other nervously. She wasn't scared for herself anymore. She was scared for them. These men had become her family, and today they were taking on monsters. "Jax," she whispered, stepping closer. "Please don't get yourselves arrested." He gave her a small, warm smile, one of the rare ones. "Don't worry, we're not the ones breaking the law today. The public exposure." At 10 a.m., the town square filled with more people than it had seen in years. The wolves had arranged for the journalist to broadcast live. Drones hovered overhead. Reporters with microphones crowded near the fountain. Then the wolves arrived. Engines roared together like thunder, and every head turned as 14 black motorcycles rolled into the square, moving in perfect formation. Jax led them, Bear on his left, Zane on his right, the others lined behind like a pack of avenging shadows. Adil and Rohail were already there. They had been summoned by a municipal emergency meeting, unaware of who had called it. When they saw the wolves, their faces turned pale. "What is this circus?" Adil spat. Rohail puffed his chest. "You idiots think a few noisy bikes can scare us?" "Not the bikes," Zane said. "The truth." The journalist turned the cameras toward Jax. "Mr. Carter, you said you had evidence to present?" Jax walked forward, holding a thick file, the one Mia had helped assemble. His voice carried through the speakers. "For years, these 2 men have stolen land, forged documents, threatened families, bribed officials, and used fear to control this town." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rohail's face twisted. "Lies! All lies!" Jax handed the journalist the first document. "Here is proof of a forged deed." Then another. "Here is a list of ghost properties registered under fake owners." Then another. "Here are phone recordings of hired men admitting they were sent to threaten a woman." Mia stepped forward. "That woman was me." Adil's jaw clenched so hard the veins in his forehead bulged. "You're all making a mistake. My lawyer will—" "Your lawyer is also on record," Jax interrupted, "taking bribes to alter municipal reports." The journalist held up the papers. "We will be publishing all of these immediately." The town erupted. Whispers, anger, shouts, cries from the people who had lost homes and savings to the two old men. Faces turned toward Adil and Rohail not with fear, but fury. The wolves stood shoulder to shoulder, silent and steady like a wall no one could break. For the first time, the old men looked truly afraid. Their lies had nowhere left to hide. But the lesson wasn't over. The police arrived, not the local officers who usually served under Adil and Rohail's influence, but a special division from the district called by the journalist. They surveyed the evidence, spoke with witnesses, compared records. Within minutes, the lead officer turned to the old men. Adil Rahmani and Rohail Siddiqui, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, bribery, criminal threats, and attempted arson. The crowd roared, some cheering, some crying, some simply stunned. But the old men weren't done fighting. Adil lunged at the officer with his cane. "You have no right! This is my town!" Rohail screamed, trying to run. He took 3 steps. Then he ran straight into Bear's chest. Bear didn't push or hit him, just stood like a wall. Rohail bounced back and fell on the pavement. Zane smirked. "Where you running, Grandpa?" Adil tried to hobble away, but Jack stepped in front of him. "Going somewhere?" Adil trembled with rage. You think you won? You're just a biker, a useless criminal." Jax leaned in, voice calm like a storm waiting to break. "I'm the man who stood between you and a girl you tried to destroy. I'm the man who showed the town your real face. And today, I'm the reminder that justice doesn't need a badge to exist." Adil's cane clattered to the ground. His hands shook as officers grabbed his arms. "You'll regret this," he screamed as they dragged him away. Jax watched them go, not with satisfaction, but with the heavy relief of a man who had carried a burden too long. The lesson continues. The town square buzzed for hours as officers interviewed people, and reporters documented evidence. The wolves helped families reclaim stolen papers, supported elderly victims who had been too scared to speak before, and reassured children who had witnessed too much. Mia stayed close to them, tears slipping down her cheeks whenever someone thanked her for being brave. Jax finally placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said, "and you helped make the town safe too." She nodded slowly. "I just didn't want anyone else to get hurt." "And you prevented that," Jax replied softly. "You were stronger than you know." The wolves stayed until the investigation ended. When the last camera went off and the crowd thinned, the remaining people gathered around Jax. "You saved us," an elderly man whispered. "We didn't save you," Jax said. "We reminded you that no one deserves to live afraid." The old men's final humiliation. Before the police transported Adil and Rohail to the district jail, they granted one request, since it concerned public safety. Jax approached the holding van. Adil glared at him from behind the bars. "Come to gloat?" "No," Jax said. "To finish the lesson." Rohail croaked. "What lesson?" Jax leaned closer. "Power isn't measured by money, or land, or fear. It's measured by how people remember you." He pointed back toward the town square. "There, right there, is your legacy. People spitting on your name, children crying because of you, families rebuilding homes you stole. That's what you leave behind." The old men stared, defeated. "And us?" Jax continued. "We'll be remembered as the ones who stood up when everyone else was too scared." Adil's eyes watered with rage. "Curse you, Carter." Jax smiled faintly. "No need. You cursed yourselves." With that, the doors shut, and the van drove away. Aftermath: the town heals. Days passed. The investigation widened. Properties stolen by Adil and Rohail were returned to families. Forged documents were canceled. Their business empire collapsed overnight. The town reborn slowly. People who had once avoided the wolves now brought them food, gifts, and thanks. Elderly women hugged Bear. Kids begged Zane to let them touch his bike. Local shops hung banners. "Thank you, Rust Wolves." One evening, Mia stood in front of her repaired home as the wolves helped repaint her porch. Bear held a paint bucket. "You sure you don't want neon pink? Could be fun." Mia laughed. "Absolutely not." Zane flicked a drop of paint at her. "White it is, then." Jack stood on the porch steps, paint roller in hand. "Your dad would have liked this." Mia smiled softly. "He would have loved all of you." They worked until sunset. And when they finished, Mia's home looked warm again, not just repaired but reborn. The bikers' message to the town: That night, the wolves gathered in the town square for a small meeting. Old members, new riders, friends, and supporters formed a circle. Jack stepped forward. For years, people feared Adil and Rohail. We let them grow like a disease. We stayed quiet to avoid trouble. He paused. No more silence. Bear raised his fist. No more fear. Zane shouted, no more corruption. The crowd echoed their words. We're bikers, Jack said, not saints. We make mistakes. But we will never let the powerful crush the weak again. Not in this town. Not while the wolves breathe. Cheers erupted, and the wolves howled, long, deep, and free, the last ride. Much later in the night, Mia approached Jack's outside the workshop. The air smelled like motor oil and pine trees. The streetlight cast a warm glow across his tired face. Jax, she said softly, will the wolves stay together now? He looked at the rows of bikes, the men laughing, the quiet peace in their eyes. Yes, he replied, a town that sleeps well is worth protecting. Mia hugged him suddenly. Thank you. For everything. Jax stiffened. He wasn't used to affection, but after a second, he hugged her back gently. Your family, he whispered. Always. The wolves mounted their bikes. Engines rumbled, headlights flared, and the pack rolled into the night for one final ride. Wind on their faces, dust rising behind them, hearts lighter than they had been in years. Behind them, the town slept safely. Ahead of them, the road stretched open and endless, and above them, the stars shimmered like freedom. The wolves had won, the town had healed, and the two corrupted old men would never forget the lesson they were taught.